To order and start with our business of the day. We have a couple of hearings that we will begin with. The first is on Senate Bill 399. We will open that hearing and ask the reviser for an overview.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Committee. This is short, sweet, and to the point. Senate Bill 399 amends KSA 40-3401, which is the definition statute for the Healthcare Provider Insurance Availability Act. The bill amends the definition of healthcare provider to include a maternity center. Quote, a maternity center is defined in KSA 65-503 and amendments thereto. The bill would become effective upon its publication in the statute book, and I will note that the Senate Committee on Financial Institutions and Insurance made a technical amendment to correct the name of the Healthcare Insurance Provider Availability Act, and the bill was passed unanimously by the Senate Committee of the Whole on February 23rd. With that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, committee. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for the overview. Looking briefly to research, I don't believe there's a fiscal note on this. If there's any cost to the providers, et cetera, they will probably tell us in testimony. So thank you. With that, would move to our first proponent testimony, and we have Mr. Clark Schultz, Executive Director of the Kansas Healthcare Stabilization Fund. Or would you like a different order? That sounds great. Would look to start with Kendra Wyatt, Chief Executive Officer of the New Birth Company. Welcome to committee.
Welcome, and thank you. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Kendra Wyatt, and I am co-founder of New Birth Company, a freestanding KDHE, freestanding licensed birth center, nationally accredited with midwife APRNs. The reason I'm here today and asking you to concur with Senate passage of Senate Bill 399 is that we want to be able to continue running the birth center. I want to provide just very quickly some context to why we're here with this bill. Back in the spring of 2021, we were told by our malpractice carrier that they were choosing to no longer service our center in the state of Kansas. This did not have to do with a malpractice claim. It had to do with the economics of that we don't pay as much. We're a small provider, and so but we do have to carry the 1 million, 3 million limits that are required for obstetrics, and as a facility we have to carry that too. So when that occurred, we then went to the Healthcare Stabilization Fund and ran into the technical gap that says that maternity centers are not covered in the fund like nursing homes and other outpatient facilities, other KDHE licensed facilities. So in the meantime, we did some corporate heroics. We made some agreements and did some appropriate things so that we could keep the birth center running. Then at that time also reached out to our representatives and senators asking what is the fix needed. We had met with Clark Schultz and the Healthcare Stabilization many times about this, and he and his staff have been very supportive and very helpful in this journey. So at that point, just to summarize again, we've gone through the Bob Bethel Oversight Committee in confirming that in order to be a Medicaid provider in the state of Kansas and for us to continue seeing Medicaid moms, we need to be able to have access to this malpractice coverage. At that point, we did the pre-work and went to the Healthcare Stabilization Fund, the Oversight Committee chaired by Marvin Klebb. Many of you know him. And at that time, we were able to have another bipartisan discussion, including the Kansas Medical Society, regarding the inclusion of the maternity center as an appropriate defined provider type. And at that point, recommended to move forward, run a bill to add this very particular fix to our very real problem. One thing I will note is that At that time, during the Healthcare Stabilization Fund Oversight Committee, it was discussed that there are multiple pieces of statute that are interrelated here. This bill, 399, is specific to the insurance part of the bill, and I would encourage you to think about that as access. If this doesn't get fixed, then we can't have access to be able to purchase the malpractice coverage that we need. Other pieces of the statute might come into play in terms of enforcement. I don't even get to play in that game unless we have this. I will end my testimony there and perhaps leave time for additional questions after Mr. Schultz speaks.
So thank you. I believe we do have a couple of questions for you, if you will take them at this.
Absolutely, whenever you'd like.
Representative Proctor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming and sharing your testimony with us. I'm going to confess I'm not terribly familiar with maternity centers. So how many, is there an overseeing physician? Is it APRNs and midwives? Is an APRN also a midwife? How's that work exactly?
Yeah, so I want to say up front that maternity centers in the state of Kansas are something for you all to be proud about in terms of being a Kansas solution. They've been around for a long time, and they are, the facility itself is similar to a hospital, and meaning it is a specific type of, in the testimony I've submitted, we talk about levels of maternity care. And maternity centers are a primary level of maternity care. And then there are hospitals, levels 1, 2, 3, 4. So our licensure is not so much given from the provider side, it's given from KDHE as a licensed facility first. So we are a licensed healthcare facility. And then in terms of the providers who can have privileges at the birth center, we can have nurse midwives, we can have certified professional midwives, we can have obstetricians. So as long as people meet the criteria, meet the privileging criteria for the birth center, and the regulations themselves very well defined in the state of Kansas to only meet a very low risk level of maternity care, healthy normal pregnancies.
Mr. Chair, my follow-up is how do I get one? Because we just lost our hospital. You can't deliver a baby in the city of Leavenworth now. So how do I get one?
Do you know what? What I will tell you, Representative Proctor, is that we have been asked by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation Center to work on economic models that would enable more alongside delivery centers or freestanding birth centers to be able to bring birth back to our rural communities. And we would love to do that.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So could you give us just an overall view of, 30,000-foot view of a little bit of what you, I understand this is about liability, but of where your funding is, where you get your funding today,
Sure. So freestanding birth centers in the state of Kansas, we operate in the same free market system that everybody does. So we do have insurance contracts. So I'm in network with all 3 Medicaid managed care plans, but also commercial insurance as well. We are also a TRICARE military facility, and we are also in network with the VA as a non-VA member facility. So the answer is primarily in insurance is really 90%, if not 95% of where our income comes from. We do still have self-pay moms who are strictly self-pay, and also a fair amount and growing amount of Christian sharing plans, which are not considered insurance, but certainly are self-pay, prepay type economic vehicles. So, who has babies, right? Young people. And young people are split in terms of being sponsored by either the Medicaid program, which in Kansas is relatively low. It's, only 39, 38% in overall. In some counties that's higher. But otherwise, it's employer-sponsored insurance. And I, just like the state of Kansas and its employee state plan, we are in network with the 2 insurance providers that you have for your employees.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, the providers, like you mentioned, like OBGYNs or midwives or, who deliver at your birthing center, are they employees of your birthing center, or do they send out their own bill to the patients?
Great question. So our particular model in Overland Park, we actually enable both. So we have certified nurse midwives who, again, are advanced nurse practitioners. And in our case, some of those certified nurse midwives are actually already have that CNMI independent practice with the Board of Healing Arts, for example. So we do bill directly ourselves from the birth center. More billing in the future is actually looking at the facility and the professional services together. As being a different way to do that. We also have a nurse midwife who has admitting privileges with us because she is an employee with a collaborator physician who happens to be in the same building.
Okay, so if it ever gets to the point where nurse practitioners don't need a collaborative agreement anymore, then that might change things for you a little bit.
And I would tell you it doesn't. And here's why. Because we are already members of the Healthcare Stabilization Fund. One member of the fund cannot be liable for the other. So the removal of the Collaborative Practice Act for us is not going to change our day-to-day activities. In fact, that a Collaborative Practice Act from time to time has really put us at risk. So we've been part of the Healthcare Stabilization Fund since 2015, and that means we stand on our own 2 feet.
All right, thank you very much. That's very
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you have in-house beds for patients to stay?
So we have 3 birth suites is what we have. And again, we're very well defined in the state of Kansas with this Kansas Fire Marshal. And also KDHE has in our regs requires certain things to be in the room, including a place for a mom to recover is the definition. So I'll just say we've got 3 birth suites. They're not considered hospital beds because we are an outpatient facility.
Okay, so do you ever keep anybody overnight?
Babies are born at 2 a.m. Mom recovers, and then she's discharged.
Okay, so there's not that 24-hour.
Right. Actually, one of the definitions of a freestanding birth center, and again, this is KDHE, is that mom does not stay more than 24 hours. If she needs that level of nursing care, we would transfer mom out.
May I ask another question? So if she develops something or the baby has a bad bilirubin count or anything like that, you then transfer them to hospitals, is that correct?
Correct. So one of the things, again, this is a KDHE regulation, is that we need to have a maternal and a neonatal transport agreement on file. And that's something that we work with those teams quite often in order to do that appropriately. So I'll just pull this back to Representative Proctor's comment, is that it's really about levels of maternity care, levels of neonatal care, just like other rural facilities have done regarding strokes or cardiac events. We're able to do the same thing with maternity.
My daughter's an OB/GYN, so I understand the different levels you're talking about. I think I had one last question. So you have a physician that oversees your practice?
No. So KDHE, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, is the licensing entity for the birth center. And that those regulations, again, I'll reference, very well written in terms of it defines what low risk pregnancy attributes are. And that's why we've been able to be, again, we're going into 12 years, no malpractice claims.
Good for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence. I'm fascinated by this topic. So you got me convinced. I just want to make sure there aren't any unintended consequences that I'm not seeing now. First, what do you think? I mean, this may be an unfair question for you. I excel at that. what do you think the market share of maternity centers is? Like what percentage of babies are born in a maternity center versus hospitals?
Sure, sure. So it's very low today. It's more like 1%. There's twice as many babies born at home. Home birth in Kansas is relatively very successful and popular. And we have to remember there's two reasons for that. One is access. We're asking moms to travel too far, which you're seeing an instance of that. And then people are also, the current situation is that childbirth is becoming increasingly unaffordable.
Yeah.
And so people are looking for more affordable options, whether that is the right risk choice to make or not. And again, we have more birth centers in the state of Kansas than New Jersey and New York does. It is something we do really well here, and I'm asking to concur with Senate Bill 399 and allow us to continue that growth.
And I have to ask this question or I'll get tarred and feathered when I go home. You don't provide any other reproductive services there, just birthing babies?
Well woman care to us is regular family planning, and it does not include specifically abortion. Okay. We do moms miscarry.
Yeah, you're not providing that service in none of these maternity centers?
That's correct, and by definition, we cannot.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Neither can certified nurse midwives, that's already on the books.
Okay, just being sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I understand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So the question that I have, we're changing the definition to include maternity center. Is there any change to what you do for getting malpractice in today's world or the future world? Where do you get that coverage now, and how?
Yeah, so prior to the carrier essentially leaving the market and saying, we're done with Kansas, because we will continue to go to the open market, and we will continue to try the open market first. I will tell you, our challenge was we had two very large, we're talking about jumbo insurers, Prudential and another Warren Buffett owned company. These are not small companies. They had their challenge was the regulatory requirements with the Department of Insurance are not favorable to them. They require bond mixtures, and Warren Buffett is very clear in his annual letter about he doesn't invest in bonds. He covers malpractice with the sales he makes at Nebraska Furniture Mart. And that gives him the widest ability to be flexible in his business model. So very briefly, we will continue to go to the open market. Passing Senate Bill 399 will not change our starting to go there first. What it will do is allow me as a business owner to legally have access to the availability fund. And again, as last resort.
So thank you. And then this could be for the executive director as well, but if you have been a member of the fund since 15 and would continue to be, is there a requirement that you catch that coverage above 500,000 with the fund, or are you able to opt? I'm not sure I'm tracking with how that works.
So there's a minimum of coverage that comes with the fund. There's a reality with the coverage that we have to purchase from another source and or the availability fund in order to operate in the free market. So the Healthcare Stabilization Fund may say, hey, you have to at least have this level, but the insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield or United, says you have to have at least that. That is where, Healthcare Stabilization Fund is this much. The last resort availability fund will cover the rest.
So thank you. And this, again, could be more for the executive director, and my understanding may be lacking, but I think I would have to find my first 500 somewhere. The next amount is perhaps required with the stabilization fund. And then again, if I need private insurance on top of that, is my understanding correct? And does either of those change?
There's two parts. And if you are willing, could Mr. Clark come up?
That would be
This would be great for him.
We'll let him
This is
testify
great for
first.
him.
So thanks. Are there any other questions for our current conferee? Seeing none, thank you. And Mr. Schultz, please join us since I introduced you earlier. Welcome back to committee. You can do your testimony and then deal with the question that I have. You don't have to jump straight into it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, and I apologize. We, I'm Clark Schultz, the Executive Director of the Kansas Healthcare Stabilization Fund. We are a state agency, so technically on a bill such as this, we're neutral. It's the wisdom of the legislature in deciding who is part of the stabilization fund and who is not. Let me just make my biggest point here. Well, I'll start and let's try to. Once you are a defined healthcare provider in statute, you are then required to purchase insurance on the open market and then an additional amount of coverage through the stabilization fund. You may recall that last year you did major work on the statute regarding the stabilization fund. Currently, starting January 1st, this year, anybody renewing, anybody beginning to receive coverage would need to buy a $500,000 policy on the open market. Then they would also be required by law to get an additional $500,000 worth of coverage from the stabilization fund through a surcharge. So virtually every healthcare provider, as defined by statute, would have $1 million in coverage. There are 16,000 defined health insurance providers, healthcare providers. And so what is happening here is that birth centers, maternity centers are asking to be included in those 16,000. And so they will, if you pass this bill, will be required by law to purchase the $500,000 base policy. And if they're unable to find that on the open market, they can obtain it through the availability plan. And it's a little more expensive, but it will be available. And then, whether they received it on the open market or from the availability plan, they will also purchase through a surcharge an additional $500,000 from the stabilization fund. Now, the one point we wanted to make with you, which is in my testimony, is what we're asking you to do is to make sure that the Secretary of Health and Environment has the authority to make sure that they are complying with the law. The stabilization fund has no absolute authority. If we find somebody, let's say a physician, that is not buying liability insurance, we would find that out, and then we would report that to the licensing agency, Board of Healing Arts in that case. In this case, we would report it to the Secretary of Health and Environment. But if you don't change something in their statute in 65-504, they will not really have anything to cause somebody to comply. That's what we're asking for. This bill 399 sets the speed limit on the highway. I'm asking you to allow a law enforcement officer to write a ticket. So I always have to have this simple illustration so that I can remember things. So we are, I guess that's probably all. You maybe have some questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
So thank you. Committee questions? I'll start with mine. And so we had you listed incorrectly. You are neutral testimony as opposed to proponent?
Yes, sir.
So thank you for that clarification. If we will note that in the hearing and in the minutes. And I will go back should there be any other proponents that wish to testify. If I can try and wrap back up, and you went through things pretty clearly, the bill as amended and the language before us currently authorizes the ticket to be written by KDHE. Is that correct?
No, sir, it does not.
Okay.
All this legislation does is, it does say that we are going to define them, the maternity centers, as a healthcare provider. And that they have, because of that, they are required to buy insurance and extra coverage from the stabilization fund. What is missing is that the Secretary of Health and Environment, who has a list of things they can take action for if somebody doesn't comply, that language is missing, saying if they don't buy liability coverage, we can discipline them.
So I'll continue on my last question. I'll go back to my first ones just to get this one set. So it sounds like we need to get that figured out and added. And would you be willing to continue to work with the proponent to help us find that language that we would need to bring this to what would allow that authority?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and it literally is like one sentence that's listed onto a list. The issue is that it is in a different section of statute, so that's an issue.
Thank you. Clarification from a revisor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was present when the issue originally came up, and what occurred was there was a portion of the request that was clearly insurance, and then the portion that dealt with licensure was clearly not insurance. So there were two requests made. The request that dealt with licensure went to Senate Public Health and Welfare. It's Senate Bill 502. They did not have a hearing on it. They chose not to work it.
So that's a separate track that we would need to work with as opposed to a portion of this bill.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, just to continue, that's because licensure belongs in public health statute, not in Chapter 40.
Okay. Thank you. To the insurance side, as we look at it now, so the maternity centers have been members since 2015 of the Stabilization Fund. Did I hear that correctly?
In their ability, if they have and I don't want to speak for the New Birth Center because I think she does a great job and has got a great organization, but I think that she has had employees that are licensed and have been able to purchase insurance and coverage from the Stabilization Fund. The words that are in this particular bill, obviously we are changing a definition and adding the maternity center itself.
Okay. So the providers have been able would continue, and those costs would essentially be the same for those providers and for the fund. Is there anything that would change anything in terms of cost to the fund? And if so, is that passed on through premiums? Any concerns that we would have there?
No, Mr. Chairman, we have a category for them, and it doesn't cost, that's why there is no fiscal note, at least from us. No costs involved. It's very, very simple to include the maternity centers.
So in looking at the other detail, and it hasn't happened to be brought up in the other committee with regard to the ticket writing authority, you probably don't wish to weigh in on whether we have a cart before the horse in providing the authority without the enforcement, just the caution to figure out how we get both of those together at some point in time.
Yes, I would, it's a fairly, we clearly, this is an important issue. And the New Birth Center, as Kendra said, we've worked with them and it's important. But I also think, here's the other problem. I have no concern whatsoever that the New Birth Center, who requested this bill, is going to comply with the law. But are there others who are going to be less enthused about that? And I think that that's what needs to be addressed. I think that there are probably ways to get this done fairly quickly. And I don't know if this is going to go to conference committee, but there I would guess that someone with the intellect in this room will be, be able to do that, and that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for entertaining mine.
Thank you, committee.
Yes, thank you. Representative, Chairman, Senator, Mayor, Director Schultz. So anyway, I'm going to wind back just a moment. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent of Senate Bill 399? We do have additional written testimony that the proponent shared from eventually I'll get the two pieces of paper to split, or maybe not. So it is not from Rebecca Williams. So we appreciate that information as well. If there is no one else wishing to appear as a proponent, is there anyone else wishing to appear neutral? Any opponents? Anyone else at all on Senate Bill 399? Seeing none, we will close the hearing. Thank you. Thank you for the testimony on that. Representative Neighbor.
May I have just a point of personal privilege for just one moment?
Okay.
Committee, many of you may not know that this lovely Representative Gail Finney had a kidney transplant at the beginning of the session and has not been able to join us because of some complications that occurred. She is with us today for the first time.
Yay.
She says she's tired, so get this done.
Thank you, Representative, and welcome. It is wonderful to see you, Representative Finney. Yes. So thank you. Our next item of business is House Bill 2733, and to open that hearing, I'd ask the reviser for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2733 enacts the Pharmacy Benefits Manager Licensure Act, and it requires licensure rather than registration of those entities. Some background information before I kind of explain what the bill does. In Rutledge versus the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, or PCMA, alleged that there was an Arkansas statute called Act 900 that regulated how PBMs created maximum allowable cost lists, which in turn set the reimbursement rates to pharmacies dispensing generic drugs. PCMA alleged that Act 900 was preempted by ERISA, and the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, held that as a cost-regulating statute, Act 900 did not have an impermissible connection with or reference to ERISA, and thus was not preempted by ERISA. So the finding by the court creates a means by which a state may regulate PBMs that was previously unavailable to the state. And based on that decision in Rutledge, we have 2733. So if enacted, House Bill 2733 would achieve three main goals. The first one being the bill would end the registration of PBMs in the state and instead require them to be licensed. Number two, based upon their licensure, the insurance department would have oversight over those PBMs and would allow the insurance department to hold PBMs accountable to current law and a regulatory structure contained in the bill. And third, it would amend the current MAC appeals process. So if you take a look at the table that I attached to the brief, and my disclaimer is the table is not the legal language. You are going to want to refer to the bill for the legal language, right? What's in the table is summary and abbreviations. But Section 1 of the bill is under the topic of oversight. It would create new law. And the nut of that section is that it creates the actions that would warrant discipline against a PBM's license, that being fraud or misrepresentation in the application process, violation of rules and regulations, or an order or directive of the commissioner. Fraud again, meaning fraudulent activity that constitutes a violation of state or federal law. Number 4, failure to furnish requested information. Number 5, violation of or nonconformance with state or federal law. And number 6, failure to timely submit a renewal application and requested information. Section 2 pertains to the licensure portion of those 3 items. It amends KSA 40-3821 and provides the name and citation of the act. It also requires that licenses are going to be required for PBMs to do business within the state on and after January 1st of 2023, and licenses issued to PBMs are going to be non-transferable. Section 3 is the definitions portion of the act. It amends KSA 40-3822, and we've added some new definitions into the bill. Number 1 being the department, meaning the insurance department. It defines ERISA, a health benefit plan, health insurer, and maximum allowable cost. Section 4 also pertains to licensure. It amends KSA 40-3233. I'm sorry, that should be 3833. 3823. Hold on, please. 40-3823, pardon the typo and the confusion of the revisor. It lists the requirements to obtain licensure as a PBM, and that information required would be contact information, a network adequacy report, a template contract including a dispute resolution process, the PBM's charter documents, an application fee, and this section also provides a timeline for the department to approve a PBM licensure application. Also provides that the information, documents, and forms are confidential, and provides a sunset clause on that confidentiality. It's standard practice for confidentiality provisions to be revisited by the legislature every 5 years, which is why there's that sunset. Section 5 amends, it also pertains to licensure. It amends KSA 40-3824. This is the license renewal process and associated fees. Section 6, I kind of threw under the category of general. It amends KSA 40-3825. It authorizes the department to enact rules and regulations, and the commissioner's responsibilities pursuant to this section are that the commissioner needs to adopt, amend, and revoke all necessary rules and regulations to carry out the provisions of this act. Section 7 amends KSA 40-3826. It is oversight and pertains to violations of the act. The hearing process and hearings would be conducted under the provisions of the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act, and also provides for penalties. Section 8 establishes the Pharmacy Benefits Licensure Fee Fund. Section 9 pertains to the definitions for the MAC appeal process and adds the definitions for pharmacist services, pharmacy benefits plan or pharmacy benefits program, and wholesaler. And Section 10 actually is the new MAC appeal process. And with that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions. I'm specifically leaving out the nuts and bolts of how the sections work because I would believe that would be kind of better spoken to by the conferees.
So thank you. Thanks. I actually appreciate the table to help me get it square in my head, so I appreciate that. Committee questions? Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question that was asked of me that I wanted to ask. Are there any costs that are associated with this that would be applied to a consumer? I see on here several references to the renewal fee and the application fee going from $140 to $2,500. I don't know if that gets passed on to the consumer, or if there's any other costs associated that I need to be aware of.
Pursuant to the act itself, it's silent on costs being passed to the consumer. Typically, costs being funneled down to the consumer is a business practice that happens within a business. It's not something that the legislature would become involved with.
All right, thank you.
Further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you for your work and your preparation. I appreciate that. With that, there is a fiscal note. It is limited. Would research care to go through that briefly, as Representative Osmond made reference?
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, committee members. The Division of the Budget sent requests to both the Board of Pharmacy and the Department of Insurance to respond. So generally, the costs that are noted are the costs to individual state agencies rather than anything specific to the costs for consumers. The fiscal note highlights many of the provisions that Eileen spoke to that would potentially generate either revenue or expenditure. Those include the non-refundable application fee increasing from the current registration requirement of $140 to $2,500, the renewal fee that would be paid annually of $2,500, and then that the commissioner could issue and serve upon any PBM subject to the act a statement of charges for any violations and conduct hearings in accordance with provisions of CAPA, and that the bill would create the Pharmacy Benefits Manager Licensure Fund, and that a PBM would be required to comply with various provisions regarding MAC, or Maximum Allowable Cost, which includes administrative appeal procedures for a pharmacy or pharmacy's contracting agent. And so the department, taking that information into account, indicates that it could increase the number of complaints regarding administrative appeals of pricing. And as a result, the insurance department would need to add 1.0 FTE policy examiner to its rate and form compliance division. The cost to the department from the licensure fund that is created under the bill would be $72,000. So that would be paying for the salary and benefits, computer, and other office equipment for this new 1.0 FTE position. The department does indicate that there are 54 pharmacy benefit managers who are currently registered with the department. And if the renewal fee increases from the $140 to $2,500, the revenue collected is estimated to be $135,000, which would be deposited to the credit of the Pharmacy Benefits Manager Licensure Fund. And so any of these expenditures or revenues are not reflected in the governor's budget report.
Representative Howe.
What would the licensure fund be used for? Is that specified in the bill as well?
Yes, that is, it is created and established, and it has, primarily that is where the penalties and fines associated with the new provisions of the act would be deposited, and then used to administer the program itself and some of those program costs.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so while we're doing the financial part of this, so if you were to take the $2,500 fee times the 54, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
You should come out real close to a figure that would help pay for the cost of adding that new person FTE. So it should be pretty close to a wash as far as added revenue versus
yes, in fact,
person.
the expenditures for the 1.0 FTE position are estimated at $72,000, which includes salary and benefits and some of the incidentals, other operating expenses that would be needed for that position to function.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for the detail. With that, we will move to our proponent testimony, and we'll start with Mr. Aaron Dunkel, Executive Director of the Kansas Pharmacists Associations. Welcome to committee.
Chairman Johnson, members of the committee, thank you very much for your time today. The revisor did a really good job of running through and kind of outlining the sections and the baseline of what they did. Obviously, if there's additional questions, we'd be more than happy to answer those as we go through testimony. all of you, I think as I look around the room, all of you have spent a number of hours with either myself or our lobbyist or some of our members over the last few years talking about our concerns related to PBMs. One of the things that continually came up in those conversations was our belief that one of the largest concerns was the lack of a structure around regulatory authority and oversight, not only for things that might be happening, but for things that are even currently in law, our MAC appeal law or audit law, some things like that. I'm really happy to report that what you have before you today in 2733 is a compromise. And really, I think it shows what can happen when you have motivated participants. You have leadership on both sides of that grouping. You have leadership within the legislature. And you have a motivation to sit down and come to terms with a law that I think works for everybody that's involved. Again, as was mentioned by the reviser, really the bill breaks down into three major components as far as we're concerned. One of them is changing the registration of a PBM to licensure. The second piece is then kind of defining what that licensure actually means and identifying the actions that could be approached or could be addressed by the insurance department as far as misbehavior. So things, basically it's breaking the law, not complying with legal request of the commissioner or committing fraud, which are all things that, again, we think that, like with any regulatory environment, obviously, not a majority of the folks that are involved in those environments partake in those kind of events, but if we do have one, we think there should be a way for us to be able to address those things. The last was really an adjustment to what's called the MAC law, which is the maximum allowable cost law. What that is it's really where you set the price for what pharmacies are getting paid for by PBMs. We had some concerns in that process around some definitions. We had a few concerns about what was being asked for when a pharmacy wanted to make an appeal on a claim. And as we sat down and kind of walked through that with the PBMs and with PCMA, we were able to come to terms on how we limit the amount of data that's legitimately being asked for from the pharmacy in response to those appeals, and then what that process looks like as far as timelines, the results of those appeals when they happen, whether they're affirmed or denied, and how we move forward from there. So that's, again, really quickly, kind of an outline. Again, want to thank our friends in legislative leadership and our friends within the PBM community to really sit down and be able to hammer out a compromise bill that we think works for everybody.
So thank you, and I think we'll have both conferees and then open up for questions, if that's all right for the committee, if that completes. Thank you. So next, I would welcome to the committee Whitney Dameron, Pharmaceutical Care Management Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Whitney Dameron, Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, my first time in front of the committee, I believe. Certainly my first time on this issue. We do appreciate the opportunity to be here today and testify on this bill. As I note in my testimony, I began working with PCMA this year, so a lot of the acronyms were new to me and trying to catch up, but I've, fortunately for everyone here, I've brought some help. So Jonathan Buxton, the Director of State Affairs for PCMA, is with me today, as well as Alex Summer of Prime Therapeutics. So as soon as we get off into the dish just a little bit, I got two guys going to stand up and help me out. We do appreciate the opportunity to stand here and join with the Pharmacists Association in supporting House Bill 2733. When I was called into work with PCMA, and Jonathan and I talked about the history of this issue in front of the committee and the legislature, and apparently goes back some years. The question comes up when you're looking at that is there opportunity for compromise? And, there always is. It's happening around the country. Other states were taking this issue up, and either resolutions were being forced upon people or they were coming to terms on their own. The latter is always preferable. That said, the two entities involved, PCMA and some of their member companies, got together with Aaron Dunkel and the Pharmacists Association in Topeka on January 26th, kind of walk through their legislation and listen to what their priorities were, the problems they're trying to solve. The PBMs made a good faith commitment and said, give us some time. We will talk among ourselves, talk among the industry, and we will give you a proposal back for ways that we might move forward if you'll give us 2 weeks' time. Reluctantly, I think they agreed to do that, but we said, we will work in good faith to get something back to them. So that date, to turn the work product around, was February 9th. So about a day or two before that, we received an invitation, if you can call it that, from the majority leader, Dan Hawkins, either an invitation, request, or a demand that the parties of interest would meet in conjunction with Chairman Johnson, with the Vice Chair Croft, and Majority Leader Hawkins, and kind of the same group that got together before, and we're going to work this out, and we're going to not leave the room until we get an agreement. It worked out pretty much that way. Got pretty close, and then we left it to Jonathan Buxton and Aaron Dunkel to kind of put the pieces together, of which they did, which is the work product here in front of you today. I know there's about 4 technical amendments that both sides have agreed to incorporate into the bill to clean up a couple of areas, and we do support that effort as well. I would say in conclusion, the companies involved did not rely upon Governmental Affairs Council to make the decisions on this legislation, and somewhere in the process, lawyers have gotten involved. It's not our position. PCMA stands in front of you today. We support the bill, but we can say, and Aaron is aware, that there are a couple of jurisdictional questions that some of the parties have that they may want to continue a dialogue with the Pharmacists Association going down the road. But I would say for today, we stand here, we support the compromise, we support the bill with the amendments that have been prepared for that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my testimony. Happy to stand for questions or call upon people who know what they're talking about more so than I. Thank you.
Very well. We'll start with Representative Proctor.
I don't think we're prepared. I'm going to defer to Jonathan. We are not asking for those amendments in this bill today. We support the 4 technical amendments that have been referenced in the legislation in front of you. Those are extraneous issues that I think other parties can have a conversation with the pharmacists about.
Sorry, I'm concerned about making more problems than I'm fixing. That's
Understood.
We're not doing that.
Well, we think this is great progress. Okay. This legislation certainly advances the issue significantly. The big issue in this legislation, in the discussion we had with the pharmacists, was moving from registration to licensure. Licensure brings upon, a great deal of regulatory scrutiny and enforcement, and that was a big give from the PBMs. And they agreed to be licensed in Kansas and move away from the registration, and that provides the opportunity for a complaint mechanism to the Office of the Insurance Commissioner and the Administrative Procedure Act to investigate those kind of complaints, and we're supportive of that process here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whitney, I noticed the name of the organization is the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association versus Pharmacy Benefit Managers. Is there a reason for that title as opposed to the word benefit? Because it's confusing when they change terms on me.
PBMs are members of, or compose the PCMA.
Are they some of the members? Is it?
All of the members of the PCMA are pharmacy benefit managers.
But you don't know the reason why they chose the word care instead of benefit to represent?
I don't know. Marketing.
Thank you.
See, I'm new here. I'm just happy to have been able to bring everybody together in a spirit of harmony. I know you've been through a lot the last 5 to 10 years, but, we're going to see this through. I played no role in that.
So thank you, and I do want to thank everyone for the spirit of harmony. It sounds like perhaps there was not on the date of the 9th and 10th, was there some concern in that time frame that I was noting as a key point of the testimony that you provide?
The only point was, I think, you know, we said we'd get back in 2 weeks with a counter proposal, which we did. We submitted that in advance of the meeting that was called on the 10th by the majority leader. And that kind of served as a basis for discussion on the 10th, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank the chairman for bringing both parties together, because this has been going on for a couple of years now, or a long time. And when you have a bill as large as this with as many components and things, it's important for the people to come to the table and see if they can work it out, because sometimes we do more damage than good when we make those decisions. So thank you, and thank you for those participants who came to the table.
We figured your revisor said, I'll do this one more time, but only if it resolves everything. On the line. Appreciate your work.
So thank you. And then you had also mentioned the questions of some of the attorneys' pieces that we may need to, any other color on some of those other concerns that we may need to look at going forward that you alluded to?
If I could call upon Jonathan Buxton maybe to make a couple of comments, and they may show up in the process between now and the governor's desk.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. And Jonathan, thank you for traveling in. Thank you for all of your work with all parties, and welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jonathan Buxton with Pharmaceutical Care Management Association. There's some jurisdictional questions that were raised because of some regulatory act in other states. We're continuing to talk about that. We've visited with Mr. Dunkel of the Pharmacists Association, and it boils down to going back and forth and visiting on that. But currently, we support this bill. Worked really hard on it. And as is, it would definitely move the ball down the field.
Thank you. Representative Proctor?
So since I have the person with the fears here, the concerns, so do you think that this is eventually going to require additional legislation? Do you think that this is something that the two parties can be able to work out, or do you think y'all are eventually going to end up in mortal combat in court? What do you think are the over-under on this jurisdictional issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the fact that attorneys get paid by the hour, my guess is it's going to be litigated. But in all seriousness, I mean, the pharmacists have been great partners in working towards this, and I think we can continue to talk with them, try to figure out something. This bill could stand alone, and there'll be questions. We'll continue to commit to working with the Pharmacists Association moving forward to address those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Revisor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's only been today since I've heard issues about jurisdictional whatevers. But just to mention, I think what the chairman of the Financial Institutions and Insurance Committee had mentioned was that there were issues that our law might bind PBMs in other states to Kansas law, which I'm not sure how that would occur. If you refer to the table that I provided, the section that deals with penalties and hearings and other oversight and regulatory matters is section 7. And it says, the first sentence of subsection A says, if the commissioner has reason to believe that a pharmacy benefits manager has been engaged in this state or is engaging in this state in activity that violates the Pharmacy Benefits Manager Licensure Act, the commissioner shall issue and serve such, upon so on and so forth. And so I'm confused as to how that might bind another party in another state, given that this is Kansas state law, number one. And, you know, I'm kind of a little befuddled as far as that goes. But as far as jurisdictional issues, forum is granted where one of the parties is doing business or where a party has been served. It's a matter of settled law. It was decided by the Supreme Court. So, you know, I really can't imagine that there would be issues given how the bill is written. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification and the work. Did you have anything further on that, Jonathan?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, and just wanted to double check with Mr. Dunkel, the specific provision in question is in section 9. It's F. It's the definition of pharmacy benefits plan or pharmacy benefits program, where it includes language that says, otherwise provides for pharmacy services to individuals who reside in or are employed in this state. That could bring in a PBM who is providing coverage to a person whose plan is written outside of this state. So for instance, I live in Oklahoma. Our corporate offices are in DC. My plan is from DC, but it's a plan that I can use in Oklahoma. That's the question that we're dealing with. We've seen some states where this language has allowed the insurance commissioner, or at least they're working towards trying to figure out whether they have the authority to reach beyond the state. But that's the provision that we're talking about. Okay. But overall, this bill, we support it.
Within section 9 and paragraph F was what we were looking at.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification on that on both sides. Further questions for our conferees? Representative Proctor.
Sorry to belabor this, Mr. Chair, but I mean, is there a preferable language that would fix this problem so we don't have to run a whole other bill next year?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, there's preferable language on both sides, and that's the issue at hand. We compromised on everything. We worked on all the stuff that's in here. This issue came up relatively recently, and we just never got a chance to sit around and hash it out. But we have a solution, the pharmacists have a solution, and they're not the same solution currently. But the bill overall, we do support as written.
So thank you. Further questions? Seeing none at this time, thank you for joining us today and previously and throughout the negotiations. Is there anyone else who would like to appear as a proponent of House Bill 2733? Seeing none, is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent of 2733? Anyone neutral? And anyone else at all on 2733? Representative Miller?
I'm a bit miffed. We have nary a word from the insurance department on this bill.
Would you have any questions that you might like to address to the insurance department on the bill?
What do they think of it?
Okay. Mr. Modisett, can you speak from prepared or off-the-cuff remarks as to this issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lee Modisett, Kansas Insurance Department. Representative, I probably should just record this at this point. Probably get tired of hearing it, but this is a policy matter for the legislature. And it's our job to implement laws that the legislature passes, so we don't weigh in for or against policy. Our primary concern is if we're being asked to do something, that we have the tools to do that. So to that end, this is up to you all to decide whether or not this is the appropriate policy.
I get that, and I wasn't necessarily needing you to speak for or against it, but I would think it would have implications for your department that you're being asked to go to a licensing function as opposed to registration. And again, I'm a little bit miffed that you don't have anything to say about such what to me appears to be a significant change.
Representative, that's a good question. We handle licensure in a number of other capacities. We deal with regulation of companies and their activities in a number of other capacities. So as it relates to our ability to do that, we have folks who do that on a day-to-day basis. So while it would be new to this space, it wouldn't be new from an operational standpoint to the department. Certainly, I believe we have approximately a year or so to, draft rules and regs. So there'll be a process to that in which we're, have to engage stakeholder feedback and all of those sorts of things. But, as far as process goes, we don't see anything in the bill that would prohibit us or cause any issues from our ability to do our job.
Well, that is helpful. I translate those remarks to being that the department sees this as inconsequential as it relates to their operation.
Thanks for the discussion, and I may have had a sidebar at the precise moment you answered the question I have, but there's no concern with the ability to pick up the licensure in the department and the processes that we set out without need for additional resources or expertise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did indicate in the fiscal note that we anticipate we'd need an additional person because we are being asked to do more through licensure as opposed to registration. But as far as finding qualified people or being able to do that work within that context, we don't have any concerns as of yet.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Revisor. No, you're okay. I think you're last at the moment, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just because I heard the concern being about pharmacy benefits plan and pharmacy benefits program, I would note, in case, just for the committee's edification, that those terms are defined in Section 9 for the use of the statutes in Section 9 and Section 10 only, specifically pertaining to the MAC challenge process. And the MAC challenge process, pharmacy benefits plan appears twice, once in the definition section and once in the actual MAC challenge process. And the provision being that a pharmacy would have the ability to submit an administrative appeal directly to the pharmacy benefits manager regarding the pharmacy benefits plan or program. And then the rest of the MAC appeal process would occur as listed. So I just wanted to point that out for the committee in case the committee thought that those terms applied throughout the bill, that they do not.
Thank you. Thank you from the insurance department as well. I think we were on the anyone else at all, and rather than conferees, we might be to any other questions at all from the committee. And if there is no one further on House Bill 2733, we will close the hearing. So with that, Representative Howe.
Mr. Chairman, as you may know, it's day 60 of the legislative session. I believe this is the second to last meeting that we have scheduled on the calendar. So with that, and in the spirit of both parties working together on this product of legislation, I move we suspend the rules for consideration of House Bill 2733 for the purposes of considering those technical amendments that were presented.
Thank you. Seconded by Representative Riley. Motion to work the bill. Committee question or discussion? Without discussion, those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. On 2733, the wishes of the committee. Representative Howe.
Mr. Chairman, I understand there's technical amendments the revisor has drafted.
So we may start with that if you would like those distributed. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So thank you. So I believe these were the technical amendments that were referenced by our conferees, and would the reviser want to go over those with us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The balloon, just as an FYI, the balloon only printed out the affected pages because I'm not into killing that many trees. But the First Amendment appears on page 3 in lines 3 and 4, and we're striking pharmacist services and inserting generic drugs in that language instead. So it would read on and after January 1, 2023, a person shall not perform, act, or, sorry, let me go back to page 2, because I'm reading from page 1. Sorry, it would be maximum allowable cost, or MAC means any term or methodology that a pharmacy benefits manager or a healthcare insurer may use to establish the maximum amount that a pharmacy benefits manager will reimburse a pharmacy or a pharmacist for, and then we're striking pharmacist services and inserting generic drugs. The Second Amendment appears on page 5. In line 21, I'm striking the word on. It should have been stricken to begin with, but apparently it wasn't, so that word is being stricken. And then the Third Amendment appears on the same page in line 30. So instead of saying including but not limited to, what the stricken language would make that read is that the commissioner may adopt, amend, and revoke rules and regulations governing the administration and enforcement of this act, limited to, and then the content of the application form, the content of any other form or report, and then such other rules and regulations as the commissioner may deem necessary. And with that, Mr. Chair, I can stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions on the amendment? Representative Miller?
Because I don't know, is there a big difference between saying pharmacist, this is on page 3, lines 3 and 4, is there a big difference between the term pharmacist services versus generic drugs?
I can answer that, Mr. Chair, if you'd like. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there is a big difference. On page 7 in lines 25 through 26, pharmacist services means products, goods, or services provided as part of the practice of pharmacy in Kansas, which is a much greater scope than just generic drugs. So the difference being that the MAC appeal process being limited to the generic, what a pharmacy benefits manager will reimburse it for generic drugs versus an entire scope of services. And I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. I think what you were saying is that this language only relates to the MAC appeal process, and that only involves generic drugs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Further questions on the balloon? So the balloon has been presented. Representative Howe?
Mr. Chairman, I guess being a freshman, I need to cut my teeth on the process a little bit, but I need to make a motion. With that, Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee adopt the technical amendments as presented in House Bill 2733.
Motion to amend, seconded by Representative Riley. And any further questions or discussion on the motion to amend? Representative Topliker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just noticed that in the title, we left out 403825. Do we not need that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask for the leeway for the reviser to make any necessary conforming amendments And of those, 2 statutes are missing out of the title. I'm not sure how that happened. But 40-3825 and 40-3830 are missing. They are included in what I've started as a potential committee report. And I would also request that I have leeway as well. Specifically, I have noticed that if we strike, if the amendment goes through to strike pharmacist services, I would like to be able to strike pharmacist services from the bill itself in the definitions section, because it's the only place that occurs, but we can do that at another time as well.
So thank you, and I would ask if the maker of the motion is okay with it to include the leeway to make those necessary technical revisions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you both for that, for the literal minutes that I gave the reviser time to prepare the document to have ready for today. So I appreciate both the work and that flexibility. And is the second okay with that as well? Thank you to the second. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Next, Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure, I think I heard it earlier, but I want to make sure the conferees are on board with the technical amendments, the 3 that were mentioned. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Miller.
I was just going to ask, are we going to let the amazing catch by Representative Toplicker go by without some level of praise?
That was a good catch. So anyway, but so thank you for the praise, Representative Miller. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that we pass out. Oh, still on the
amendment. So we'll
I'm sorry.
on the amendment
Okay.
shortly, and I will-
I'm sorry. I jumped ahead of my head.
No worries.
Of myself.
Other questions or discussion on the amendment? If not, Representative Howe, you may close.
Mr. Chairman, I close.
Heard the motion by Representative Howe to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion carries. On the bill, Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we pass out House Bill 2733 as amended and put it in and rename it a substitute for Senate Bill 28. This puts it in compliance with what the Senate has, and we'll probably get it on the floor faster.
Seconded by Representative Howe. Point for the reviser.
Oh. Mr. Chairman, I got ahead of myself, and so Representative Howe, it's not just freshmen that make mistakes. I would like to remove the information in Senate Bill 28, the current contents of Senate Bill 28, and replace them with the House Bill 2733 as amended.
Thank you. Seconded by Representative Howe. Questions or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
Without further ado or mistakes, I close.
Heard the motion by Representative Neighbor to strike the contents of Senate Bill 28 and replace it with the contents of House Bill 2733 as amended in the committee. All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion carries. Representative Neighbor.
Do you want to question her on that first? They were checking my language. Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to emergency ocean, suspending the rules and working Senate Bill 399. We're not going to.
If I may, to a point of order, very quickly. Director Schultz, did you have some thoughts for us on Senate Bill 399 that you had been conferring on relating to the possibility of an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Very briefly, we spoke out in the hall. We've reviewed the difficulty of trying to change the statute. We found some language in maternity centers and child care facilities in 65-504 that gives us comfort that we will be able to proceed with the Senate Bill 399 as it exists.
Thank you. So changing the authorization is allowed, and you at least found a trooper with a bicycle that can provide some level of enforcement?
That was very well put.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So thank you. Okay, so thank you. So we have a motion to suspend the rules on Senate Bill 399. Seconded again was by Representative Proctor. Question or discussion on the motion to suspend? Since I'm finished with my own discussion on it, thank you for that, committee. And I guess I'll give you the chance to close on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will close on my motion.
So thank you. You've heard the motion to suspend the rules by Representative Neighbor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. On Senate Bill 399, Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that we pass Senate Bill 399 out favorably.
Seconded by Representative Proctor. Question or discussion on the motion to pass favorably? Seeing none, Representative Neighbor, you may close.
I close.
Heard the motion by Representative Neighbor to pass Senate Bill 399 favorably. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. With that, committee, I would ask for one more to turn our attention to Senate Bill 448, which dealt with the rebating issue, and I would ask for the revisor to give us a brief overview to bring that back to mind.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This Senate Bill 448 was the bill that adopted the National Association of Insurance Commissioners amendments to the Unfair Trade Practices Act. The bill as written, as you recall, excluded commercial property and casualty insurance producers, brokers, and insurers from the rebating laws on the books, but the Senate Committee on Financial Institutions and Insurance struck that exclusion, and so the bill actually would apply uniformly to all insurers, brokers, and producers with regard to the anti-rebating laws. And I can stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Proctor.
So I'm drawing a complete blank on this one. So the National Association of Insurance Commissioners kind of model had those exclusions in it. Is that what you're saying?
And would the insurance department care to comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lee Modesitt, Kansas Insurance Department. Representative Proctor, your question. Originally drafted, we included exemptions for commercial that was not part of the model, and then some folks expressed concerns, so we went amended that out and went back to just the model. Yep.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Seeing none, what would be the committee's wishes on Senate Bill 448? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask that the committee pass out favorably Senate Bill 448.
Seconded by Representative Riley. Questions or discussion? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close.
Heard the motion by Representative Neighbor to pass Senate Bill 448 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. Representative Neighbor.
One last point of personal privilege. We are missing a member today who fell on the ice on Saturday and broke her elbow and her ankle, and that's Heather Meyer. So keep her in your thoughts. She will not be here this week because somebody's going to have to drive her.
So thank you for that point as well, Representative, and an enormous thank you to virtually everyone in the room, everyone that worked so hard across the board to try and find a way to a compromise, which I know was not easy. I know it was not easy in the timeline, to staff in the efforts to get everything ready and the possibility of doing what we've done, to the committee as well. And with that, we are adjourned until Wednesday.